Hello, everyone. I am Kimberly Harris, and I welcome everyone to the Women's HQ Survivors Coffee Circle. And we have an incredible guest today on our podcast show, Mrs. Rita Smith. Um, Rita Smith and I will discuss a whole line of information that's going to be informative and approachable ideas to ending domestic violence and sexual assault. And Rita's a good friend and she's a great advocate in the space. And I'm very honored to have her on my podcast today. So, Rita Smith, let's talk. Hello,
Hey,
my
Kimberly,
friend.
how
How
are
are
you?
you?
I am good, thank you. It's good to be with you.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Rita. Rita. So you have been a busy person. As I know it, my bio information tells me you're doing international expert in violence against women. You've been in this space, I guess, for 22 plus years. Once as the executive director over at the National Domestic Violence Against Women organization, and you sit on a numerous amount of boards. One of my favorites is the American Bar Association, and yeah, I want you to talk to my guests about what you do currently, which I find exciting. But I'm gonna let all of this exciting information be shared by you. So, Rita, welcome to Women's HQ podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. Happy to be with you. So, yeah, I've done this work a really long time. I started out as a weekend crisis counselor in 1981. It literally didn't know what I was doing. I did an interview for a counselor position. They hired me after 2 interviews, and their first question to me at that first interview was, "What do you know about battered women?" And I didn't have a clear answer because I didn't know. It wasn't information we talked about. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology. I hadn't heard the term ever in my 4 years, and so it was a real learning experience for me from the very beginning. And I had originally thought I was going to work with emotionally disturbed kids all of my life. Had an intricate plan, actually. I had devised for myself. But when I got that job at that shelter, man, Kimberly, the women and children there, what they shared with me, what they told me about their lives, about what they couldn't do because of what someone else was doing to them. It just kind of redirected my entire future. Didn't know it at the time, but that's really what happened. I kind of got really focused on no wonder kids aren't doing well if they aren't safe at home. It's like started to make sense to me that kids needed help because it wasn't safe where they lived. And so
Absolutely.
so it felt to me like that was the seed of where we needed to go to address a whole lot of societal issues going on, is making people feel safe at home.
Right.
And so I did that in local programs. I was a director of a local program here in Colorado. And then in late 92, I went to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And in the early part of 93, I became the director for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and was there for over 20
Quite a long
years.
time,
Yeah,
22
yeah,
plus
yeah.
years. Yeah,
So far, the longest serving director of that organization.
of course.
And so, yeah, that was a different perspective. It wasn't crisis work anymore, but it was working with everyone who did crisis work, helping them get the training they needed, helping them through our conferences, helping them understand the policies that we needed to impact, better outcomes at the federal level, which then influenced state legislation. So we did a lot of policy work with Congress. And with then Senator Biden to get the Violence Against Women Act passed. And so I think that, I was working in a different framework than answering a crisis call every day, but it was really making it better for people who answered those calls. It was about listening. And I talked to, met, um, got to spend time with a lot of survivors over the course of my life, and just the most resilient, amazing human beings. Smart, creative. Uh, people think, people involved in violence or being hurt are nuts and they're not acting rationally. And what I learned from people like you and others who have been in this experience is that, it may look crazy from the outside, but the strategies that you took were what got you through the day alive, right? And so it doesn't matter if it looks reasonable. It's what you determine from that particular situation. I have to do this to get to the other side. I have to do this to be able to breathe. And you did
That's
it
right.
and you got there. And that's it. We have to stop judging people based on what we think we would do,
Absolutely.
because I think that's our worst response to victims of violence is that we say, well, I wouldn't. You don't know what you would do if you were faced with life. And so I just feel really fortunate I've been able to do this work at this space that I've done. And so, yeah, along the way, I was looking for um, creative strategies to try to address these issues because the traditional options weren't working very well or at any speed. And
Right.
so I started looking for lots of different kinds of ways
Okay.
to impact this work.
Right. Well, that leads us to what you do today, which I believe is just like, whoa. We met in New York City, right? At the
Yep.
UN event. And you were extraordinary then, and you were even more extraordinary after I had the formal introduction of meeting you properly. And knowing what you do now as the senior advisor over at the NFL, um, against violence against women, I think that's the title you have there. That's exciting, Rita. Tell us.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a real process. And like I said, I was always looking for creative strategies around how do you do this work better? How do you get better outcomes for victims? And somewhere along the way, I think most of us who do this work recognize that if we didn't get more men engaged in this work, if men who do not abuse don't stand up and say, brother, that's wrong, stop it, we are never going to get to the other side of this. We're never going to get the numbers down to what feel like might be reasonable numbers.
Right.
And so in 1998, while I was still at the National Coalition, I contacted the NFL and said, because this was not long after the O.J. Simpson trial, right? And so it
Mhm.
was like in front of everybody. Everybody kind of knew, had been educated on some level about what domestic violence was at that point. And so, and because of his association with the NFL, I contacted the NFL and said, I'd like to meet with you. I'd like to talk to you about how you might be able to help us. And so somebody who was coming out to a Denver Broncos game came out and met with myself and a board member. And
Mhm.
what I shared with them, Kimberly, was I wasn't coming at them from a you all bad and you need to change kind of thing. I was coming at them from, you spend a lot of time and energy cleaning up messes. You spend all of your resources on responding to bad actors. But that's not most of the people associated with your league. Most of the people, most of the players I know about are good family members. They're good community members. They have charities. They like help raise money. It's like they're good people. I want to talk about those guys. I want to work with those guys. And so that was my pitch to them from the beginning was, how do we get the good men to stand up and set a standard for what all men should do? And they couldn't figure it out. He listened. He was very kind and listened, but they just didn't know how to do that. They didn't know how to get to that place. And so from 98 until um, 2012, I would poke them every time I found an opportunity to say, hey, love to work with you. Hey, this thing happened. Would you want to talk now?
Right.
And then I got traction in December of 2012, when Javon Belcher murdered
So
Cassandra Perkins.
let me go back one. So when you got bridged over to the NFL. Um, this Devon Belcher, um, Javon Belcher, that was December 1st of 2012.
Mhm.
So this was like your real introduction into the violence inside. You're looking from it from an inside perspective because you're now a consulting with the NFL. So yeah, what can you walk us through that?
Yeah, well, that was the impetus that actually got me in the door. So while I was at the National Coalition, that murder suicide happened. So he killed Cassandra Perkins, drove to Arrowhead Stadium, and shot himself, committed suicide in front of a couple of his coaches. Um, and so that was the first murder suicide that was within my framework of under. It wasn't the first time a player had killed a girlfriend, because Ray Caruth had actually done that. He was Carolina Panther, and he'd actually done that prior to that. But
Did
this
you
was
think, can I just ask you quickly, do you think that the league had any idea that this was going on prior to Javon coming to a stadium and committing suicide the way he did?
I think it's possible that people within the Kansas City Chiefs might have known something was going on, that there might have been trouble within that relationship. I doubt the league was aware of it, because prior to me becoming an advisor with the three other people I work with, they didn't do this kind of drill down. Um, they didn't report information up and down the chain,
Right,
from what I could tell.
right,
So after that murder suicide, I connected with somebody I'd met in the process of me trying to figure out how to get more men involved,
right.
a man named Don McPherson, who used to be a quarterback for the Philly Eagles. And a really good man. He had after he left the NFL, he had started doing anti-violence speaking.
Violence, yes.
Really good guy. And
Yeah,
so I had met Don, and I asked him to co-write a letter to Roger Goodell with me, after that murder suicide in
gotcha.
Kansas City.
Mhm.
And we got invited in February of 2013. uh, Don and I got invited into the league offices to talk to them about what might be strategies.
Mhm.
And at that point, what I was talking to them about was internally how they could manage the trauma that they had experienced as an organization, and the Kansas City Chiefs as a team, how they could deal with that. Gave them a list for their internal distribution of all the programs to doing domestic violence and sexual assault work in the cities where NFL teams were, so that if things were happening, they would know how to reach out and get support and help from people who actually knew how to do this work.
Right.
And so that was from February of 2013 until July of 2014. I was internally working with one of their departments to help them get educated about what resources were available, how could they respond, what's the right response, kind of thing. So it was really a kind of a limited strategy. It was the first time I was in the door and actually had a contact within the NFL that I worked with. And then in July of 2014, I left the National Coalition. And in August of 2014, the video that TMZ had got released, the Ray Rice assault video.
And let me ask you, um, so during these, of course, these are national, like worldly, really incidents that occurred.
Mhm.
U.S. professional sports, but of course, U.S. professional sports is known all around the world.
Right.
Um, just before you go into the Ray Rice situation, can you just let us know, like, how much of an impact is that when you have these incidents of violence that either a player, a coach, owners, whoever is in that space? What does
Mhm.
that do to the morale of the overall brand?
Well, it generally, what had been happening was that they would do a whole lot of close ranks and protect.
Right,
And then the fans were horrid. I mean, the fans were just horrid if anyone ever made accusations against a player or
right,
someone associated with a team. They got hammered and abused and threatened constantly. I mean, now you know how it is with women who use their voice on any kind of social media. They just
Right.
get troll after troll doing vicious, horrible
Because
things to
that's a
them.
shield.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah. I mean,
shield.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think back to Kobe Bryant when he was accused of sexual assault, and the woman there refused to go forward with the case because she was getting so much harassment from his fans and death threats that she just dropped the case. She wouldn't go forward. And so that kind of energy, the amount of courage it takes just to say that out loud, and then to have to deal with that kind of a backlash is just horrid. So really, what I think sports teams do on the most part, no matter what league it is they do a lot of protecting, closing ranks kind of thing. And prior to the video and that becoming like a massive public backlash against the NFL. There have been shifts, I think, depending on the leagues, about how they do things now. But at that point in time, they were just protecting themselves and covering up and going underground a little bit until it all died down. Was really how it was being dealt with.
So what was your involvement in that whole Ray Rice process? Yeah,
Yeah,
that was your intro
that,
into
that
now
was that
being
was
a
my
senior.
first. That
You
was
had to go in and advise, you had to put
yeah,
on your shield or
yeah,
you had to put on your cape actually, because you were
yeah.
probably what, one of no women that were on that senior advisory platform?
No, there are women who work in the league, and more that so than in previous generations. But the Ray Rice video, I was still just kind of tangentially working with the person that I had a contact with after the murder suicide, and when I saw their statement about the Ray Rice video, I called her and I said, let me help you. He's getting such bad advice because of how he had responded, how
Right.
Goodell had responded, the kind of things that he'd said. And it wasn't, I think, from any um, ill intent on his, but I just think that his legal team was giving him bad advice. They totally did not understand domestic violence, did not get what the issues were, and so his public statement was, it was like, he's getting bad advice. This was such a bad decision. And so that's when I think they started looking at, we need to do something much broader here. And they did some interviews with a lot of different experts that were referred to them. I was one of the people that they interviewed in terms of bringing on an actual group of advisors to help them think through their strategies,
Right.
provide education, that kind of thing. And they decided I was one of the people they wanted to hire. So initially there were 5 of us. It was myself and Jane Randall, Tony Porter,
Excuse me.
Beth Ritchie, and Lisa. Lisa is now internal. She got hired. That's awful that I can't remember Lisa's last name. But anyway, Lisa was a special prosecutor for Manhattan DA a long time, so worked in special victims unit, so understood DV and sexual assault really well. So
Mhm.
they hired the 5 of us. Lisa Friel was her last name. So Lisa, Tony, Beth, Jane, and I were the team that they brought in that first year, and then after that first year closed out, the second year Lisa got hired to do all the internal investigations for domestic violence and sexual assault. And then Tony, Jane, and Beth and I stayed and are still currently advising the league since 2014. Fall of 2014. So their commitment was real. It's 9 years plus going now. And they mostly listen to us, Kimberly. They mostly do what we suggest. But it
They're
is
coming around. I know,
they're
because
slowly
you know my story too
yeah,
with the
yeah,
NBA.
slowly I
So yeah,
turn, kind of
they're
thing.
slow. They're slow about it, but
Yeah.
they'll listen. You know what? It showed the commitment of hiring the people that they needed to advise them in the right direction. That was the first approach. So you gotta, although it goes in baby steps, but
Mhm.
that's the way organizations, that powerful and not large, that's the steps they need to take.
Yeah, yeah,
Because you're protecting a lot of people here.
yeah.
And
And it's a business, right? It's a
it's a
business,
business
and
and
so, you know, yeah, yeah, I
yeah.
get that part.
So once I know I read an article years ago. I kind of Ray Rice. I don't I know that he was punished. I know the end result that he was punished. He matter of fact, he never got back in the league again
No,
to play.
nobody would, no, no, he was suspended. Initially it was the 2-game suspension, and then that was revised after the commissioner thought about it for a while. And so he got suspended for longer, probably fined. Um, but then no one else would would put him on their team.
Put him on.
So now that's a different story now, though. They have gotten over that issue of moving abusers around. They do that now. But they didn't then. Ray got hammered pretty hard. And I'm going to give credit to Ray for the work that he did.
Yeah, he's doing a lot now.
That he and Janae did together, and they got married and they've had kids now. But Ray and Janae did work separately and together, and he now does education for kids about making choices and how
And he's back coaching, I understand, at the college
he
level.
may be at this point
Yeah,
coaching maybe high school or things like that, but
yeah.
he, unlike many abusers, he actually
He did the
made a
work.
commitment to make changes and to make different choices. And as far as I know, he has done that. And I need to give him, props for that, because
Yeah.
it's hard work, and he was willing to do it.
And as we know, like, the continuation of this is that, again, we go back to what you echoed in the very beginning of the conversation about the need for abusers, whether it's a man or a woman, because like people always think, oh, this is just a woman, the women are victims, the men are the abusers. But as we know it, like it can go either way. It can go either way. But tell us a little bit more, because I know they keep you busy there up in the NFL. Tell us about this. I was shocked that after the Ray Rice incident, there were a lot of other incidents coming out of the league, but the most notable one recent was Deshaun Watson with the Cleveland Browns now.
Yeah.
So he got transferred out of the Texans and went to Cleveland, and he still had these 21, 22 civil suits of sexual assault following behind him.
hmm
How did you play a part in any of that? Of what do we do with a Deshaun Watson? What's going on with a Deshaun Watson? What do we need to support the victims and him on? Like, what do you do at that point if you're the NFL?
Well, the process at that point, because that was one of the things that we as advisors did, was put things in place about how do you respond, and what kinds of things would you require someone who has been this that has engaged in this kind of behavior, has hurt other
Mhm.
people, has been accused of hurting other people. What can you do to ask them to show us that they've made changes, right? And so,
Right.
um, so definitely, the advisors had conversations about the whole. Once it hit the newspapers while he was still with the Texans, and the number of women making charges against him who were massage therapists just kept piling up, and it got, I think, as you said, to at least 22 accusations against him. But at the so Texas, so he had sat out a year because he wanted to force a different contract, and that's when all this news came out about him. And so the Texans didn't want to keep him at that point. And so they were willing to trade him. And other teams weren't willing to look at him until the Harris County DA decided whether or not they were going to charge him. So when they decided not to charge him, then teams started to show an interest. Now, none of this had been settled. The civil suits had started, and so what he and his management team decided to do were they were paying off people so they would go away, and so they were paying off the women who had made, so not all of them um, reparations and then go away. Some of them continued while there were trade negotiations going on. What my frustration was, and I was interviewed about this by a Cleveland paper, was that the Browns took him with absolutely what it looked like no expectations, no considerations about you do this again and you're gone kind of stuff. They gave him a massive contract, like one of the bigger contracts
200
at the
something
so
million
250
dollars.
million or something, with like what felt like no caveats whatsoever. And so he just got rewarded all over the place, no holding him accountable for anything. And I said that disappointed me, and the Cleveland Browns ownership were not happy with that. I heard later that they were unhappy with my assessment that they made a choice that actually seemed to enable him and not hold him accountable anyway. Now, he was supposedly required to do counseling sessions and things like that, but because that's there's all kinds of confidentiality laws. I only know that that the very basic minimum, which was that he was doing that, but I don't know what they were talking about. I don't know who it was that they were. The first person that they might have suggested, um, our questions always as advisors were, what's their experience of domestic violence and sexual assault? Are they experts in this work? Do they know anything about it? Or are you just talking about a therapist? Because it's very different to have somebody who knows something about how do you work with abusers and something about trauma. And so I don't know any of that. I don't know who he saw or for how long. I don't know if he continued while he was in Cleveland. But it was disappointing to me that the teams, even though the league was very committed to this education and process change, that the teams seemed to allow at times the finances to be more important than the moral standing that many of us as fans expect from them.
It's if you take away all of it, all the money, the power, the prestige,
Mhm.
the honors, you still strip them down to human beings.
Right.
And, as a survivor of domestic violence, I've told you countless times, I have no room for people that come and not have a day. I mean, you don't have to be a victim or a survivor of this. Lord knows I wouldn't impose that on anyone, but do know what you're talking about, especially when you're talking against victims who have stories of violence that were committed against them, and you're trying to silence them. And, just like I wouldn't want a victim to readily accuse me of wrongdoing when I didn't do anything wrong. It's the same way, and people need to start looking at it in the same light. Like, if there's some credibility on the issue, then we have to explore the issue. We have to be fair in the approach. There's not enough people educated in any of these leagues. They're not educated on what the signals of an abuser are. That's where you begin. Like, conversations in the leagues, do they ever begin with just sitting in, after practice and engaging their players, their coaches, their, owners come in and really have sessions that overall think about, you know, not necessarily confronting or accusing anybody of anything, but just having manly conversations about, well, do you do this on your off time or do you do this on your off time? Because if you're doing this on your off time, then maybe we need to take a look at that and how can we support you on not doing so? For instance, the triggers I see a lot of these players fall prey to is like they go out with friends that not or necessarily not in the league, just friends from the past.
Mhm.
And they're hanging out, NFL can't control that. NBA can't control that.
Right.
NHL can't control that. I mean, you are who you are, right? Um, but they have their downtime and it's their right to share that with whomever. But then you get like the stories of Jay Moran.
Mhm.
Come on.
Mhm. Right.
I don't care if it's a play gun, a real gun. The issue is, why are you doing it? At the end of the day, why are you doing it? Like, is there any conversation ever that you know about that pre-development stage? Because you have a lot of young players, they're young, they're immature a lot to come in and they don't know. They do, I mean, it's like raising your kids. Like, they're going to do things that aren't necessarily agreeable. And some do, some don't. That's the thing. Some do, some don't. But Rita, what is the deal with the approaches of developing, a better player or a better coach well, owners, that's a different story. But if you have a player or a coach that's in trouble, what is the development strategies around that to help them out if they're in these abusive situations?
Well, I think that's a hard one because the reality is that if in professional sports, and I know this is true in the NFL, that the 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 teams um, are not all together except during the season, right? Because a lot
Right.
of these players don't live where they play; they
Hmm.
live somewhere else, and so the only time to get them all together, the administration, the football operations, and then the teams and the athletes themselves with the coaches is like during the season, and they are slammed for time. It's not like they have a lot of extra time to do this kind of conversation you're talking about. And so trying to get information at the professional level to the organizations is hard. But at the NFL, we have a mandatory um, a 50-minute education session every year that they're required to take, that they're required to participate in. We created it ourselves. It's a new, it started out that first year with DV and sexual assault 101, kind of what is it? What's its impact on people and how does the NFL family help? I mean, we started there and just built on that over the last 9 years.
Right.
Um, so every year they've gotten more information, more understanding, deeper conversations. They have become more engaged in those conversations, from what I can tell.
Hmm.
Initially that first year they were really just like, really defensive and especially in the locker room, the team meetings, they were really just feeling like people were like pointing the finger at them. And so, but it's moved to a place where I think a lot of them are having some deeper conversations and understanding how their lives might have impacted. So I think that I can say that for sure that's happened within the NFL. I don't know if the other leagues have even done that level of kind of educational
Yeah.
investment. But all of the uh, player engagement people at each of the team levels, they're all aware of what the resources are in the local communities. This was a mandatory session every year for everybody, owners to groundskeepers. So
Hmm.
everybody that's associated with the NFL had to take this session. So my feeling is though that what's going to make the most difference and how we're going to have the most impact is that we have to do this. If it were my fantasy, it would be in Pop Warner football. We'd be talking to them little kids, 8 and 9 year olds out there for the first time, running around together,
Run around the field.
teaching them respect for self and others.
That's right.
It would start there. And then as they progressed it through into, high school and college, they would get deeper kind of conversations because you might have more
Absolutely.
time in those environments to do some deeper conversation before they ever got to the pro level. So
Absolutely.
I've had conversations like that with Commissioner Goodell about, using their Play 60 platform, for instance, because
Play 60,
yeah,
yes.
because they already talked to the kids about healthy bodies, right? And they're out there moving around with them. My first conversation with him was, you could just add a component about healthy relationships, and you'd be like, starting a prevention process in a platform you already have going on. And every team does that with their local community, right? So
Right.
there are strategies around, at least my understanding is deeper about the NFL, but all the different sports leagues, I think, have the opportunity to impact in their communities, a reduction in violence, a conversation about violence reduction. And so, if they're willing, if they're willing to work with their local advocates, local community, providers, we can make a significant difference through sports, I think. But they have to be willing to invite us to the table and help us explode our message in ways that we would never be able to, because you and I doing this on our own, we're committed, we're passionate, and we're not giving up, but we're not going to get to 1 billion media impressions, which is what the
That's right.
NFL had that first season with the no more PSAs they were doing. 1 billion media impressions in that first year. So that's the reach they have, and that's the reach we need to have the kind of impact you and I are looking for, which is we want people to be safe at home.
What's our next steps, Rita?
Well, we keep poking at them, saying, "Come on, take this other step. Come on, get a little
You know, the
deeper."
NBA, the NBA slow, but those guys are coming around too. They're holding summer camps now,
Yeah.
inner city summer camps now that are not just for the little tykes, but they're now doing it with high schoolers, which I
Hmm.
think is excellent.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, Washington D.C. We've had a flux of juvenile crime,
Hmm.
uh, juveniles committing crime, not just carjackings, but we're up to like escalation of murders now. So
Hmm. Hmm.
somebody somewhere, um, in some way, um, we need to do community oversight a lot better. But again, I do, kind of, accolade off of what you said. We need collaboration. I mean, that's
Hmm.
the key word here. We need
Yep.
people that really have strong voices in the neighborhoods that need to hear the messages.
Right.
And, you and I, we're just not going to, go up to a media, session and get 1 billion hits because that's
Right.
just never going to happen for us. But, uh, you know, as long as we've been, as a survivor, unfortunately, but even as an advocate in my space that I'm working in with Women's HQ right now, um, although we're working on the holistic, of trying to get trauma through wraparound services rendered to survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, it's still a collaboration effort that we must meet because we have to be a part of a community.
Right.
That's the thing. We have to be a part of a community. And, professional sports plays a big part in that. I've said this for years. Like, I know a lot of these guys would love to do it. And they say, well, in my contract, that prohibits me to do this. I can't say this. I can't say that. If I get on social media. But I see these guys all the time on social media saying the stupidest things
Yeah.
sometimes. And it's like, why can't we get you on social media to
Saying
talk
something
about
smart, right?
say something that will suppress, civil society from being out of control. Like, why can't we get them on to focus them on that, And, maybe they just don't understand the power they have as influencers. Maybe they just don't understand that. But I would love to I would love for them to hear somebody say that. Rita, you got to get to them and tell them that. They're big influencers.
They are, and the influence that they can have to reduce violence is massive. And
Yes.
it wouldn't even take a huge amount of effort. It's, whether they're just putting stuff up on Twitter or TikTok, or even on a LinkedIn page, or if they're on Facebook, or it's Instagram, however they're communicating with their fans,
Right.
communicating about making choices that don't hurt people,
Right.
and calling that out, and asking people to stop abusing victims who might make allegations. I mean, there's a lot of ways that they can interrupt some of this cultural, you know, yeah, trolling that goes on.
Yeah.
They would listen to a LeBron James way better than they listen to you or me. Because it's just wrong. You can wonder if somebody's allegation is true without calling them the C word. You
Right.
can do that. You can
Right.
say, I'm going to wait for the investigation to finish. But nobody should hurt anybody else. You can say those things,
Right.
and do that in a way that actually moves people towards a more accepting process of that. Sometimes people that you admire, make bad choices, and holding them accountable for those bad choices doesn't mean that you're throwing them out. You're just wanting them to be the best human they can be, and trying to find ways to have people that have the kind of influence that we're talking about in national sports, would be a significant change for them to just have little sound bites that they just push out every
Mhm.
week, to their
During
fans
the
about how.
seasons. Yep.
Yeah,
During the
just pushing
seasons.
out, a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of conversation, calling us to be our best selves, that kind of thing. Never choosing to use violence um, as a way to get your needs met. That it just challenging that every chance they get, and really, not even direct, like stop it, just really kind of questioning,
And let me give a shout out to a few that are doing it. And, because I don't
Yeah,
want
let's
this
do
to
that.
be one-sided here, where somebody sees this, one of these NFL players see this and say, oh, they're bashing us. Listen, Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles, extraordinary young man, extraordinary. Give him all kinds of props all day long. Russell Wilson, you know what? Russell's been in this a minute, and he and his wife Sierra, they work hard in their communities. Now he's
Yep.
with Denver. Think
Yep.
he's still
Yep.
with Denver. They do extraordinary things in
Yeah.
their community. Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens.
Mhm.
I've seen Lamar in many, many community events,
Mhm.
and he's always there showing up for those kids,
Yep.
as they are his own. And, you know, um, you know, I there's so many great players
Yep.
that do the work, and they don't get recognition. They don't even get the recognition for it.
Right.
So I mean, shout out to you guys. I love you guys. I love my NFL guys, and Lord knows my NBA guys. I got to shout out to them too. LeBron, I love you too. Because they're gonna get mad with me. I just came up there to giving all the love to the NFL guys. But I love those guys. I mean, I'm even an MLB fan. I'm even an NHL fan. Like, I'm ready to talk to everybody
You
that's
bet.
on that professional platform of sports, to come to the table and really understand what the needs of the community, because this is community based
Yeah.
information that we're trying to share. We're
Mhm.
trying to, they got voices that we don't have. And
That's right.
it's just, and I don't know if it's just that I know during the seasons, like you said, they're real busy, but like, you got a week off? Don't they get a week off? Well, I don't know. NBA
Uh,
doesn't. The
yeah.
NFL gets
They get a
a bye
day.
week.
They get a day a week off, I think. So usually it's a Tuesday, um,
Okay.
that they have off, and then when they have their bye week, they've got more time, right? But during the season, it is really limited. But then there's a months in between, when the Super Bowl ends and, training camp requirements start. And so
Sorry.
there's a block of time
Yeah.
from spring through late summer where there are opportunities for them to do more. And when you talk about community, it's, the average, I don't know what it is in other leagues, but the average player in the NFL is there for 3 to 5 years. They're not there most
They're
of their
not there
life.
long to make
And
an impact at all.
yeah,
You're right.
and then they're in our communities for the rest of their lives. And
Yeah,
so I want them to be the best human being they can be when they leave the league.
that's right.
And that's part of the goal for me, is that if they haven't learned this information, if they don't understand this information, I want them to know it before they get to be my neighbor, because I want to be safe. I want the people who live with them to be safe.
You
And
know,
so
I tell this story all the time. Like, growing up, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm a diehard Steelers fan. But when we were kids, Rita, believe it or not, you know, the Franco Harrises, the Jack Hams, the Lynn
mhm,
Swans. I mean, like we'd go down. My mother used to have this, her favorite location to eat was to take me down to Market Square, and they had an oyster house down there. But the big exciting thing was to periodically run into Jack Ham. Now, Jack Ham was a big guy with
yeah,
no
huge.
teeth. He looked like
I know.
he looked like the boogeyman to us. But Jack Ham was a gentle giant. He was so sweet, at least to the children. He was real sweet. Now,
He
to
was
his
like Rosie
opponent,
Greer. He
he
was like
was a
Rosie
real
Greer.
nice
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
But you could sit in a park and actually approach him, and he would sit there for hours and talk to you with no teeth and all that. And the next time you see him, you'd be like, oh, that's the big guy. He's a good guy. He's a real good guy. And just the look in some of the little boys' eyes when they
Mhm,
see him,
mhm.
it was like they were mesmerized.
Right.
And they hang on to every word that come out of his mouth. And those are the kind of influences that we're talking about here. Like his voice, all he would have to do is open his mouth, and say a couple words. And these little guys were just standing still,
Yeah.
include me. I fall
Right.
in line with that. And, Franco Harris was another one.
Mhm.
He didn't even have to talk above a whisper. Franco Harris was a real laid back, mild mannered man. And he would just not talk above a whisper, but always, always jubilant, always approachable. I mean, it's just, now I just see a lot of these guys are unapproachable. They're out off in their own little world sometimes. And I get that. A lot of them have families, and a lot of them are going through a lot of things. I imagine it's hard, right? Being a professional sports player
I expect
in
so.
any professional league. And
Mm.
you got media, I mean, when you win in big games like that, like, yeah, I guess it's a thing, like, maybe they don't always want camera attention. Maybe they don't always want to be in the limelight, but this is what you signed up for. But maybe that's left us now in professional sports. Maybe that's what's left us now. Maybe we need to regain that back in a way. But all I know is that, I wish they would bring the attitudes of the Jack Hams and the Tony Dorsetts and the Franco Harris's, and oh my God, Jerome Bettis. I know I'm naming all
Yeah.
the Stiller guys, but that's all I grew up on. That's all I know, right? And I travel. I go to some games. I meet some players, but it just seems like to me there's just such a disengagement there.
Mhm,
It's like play. Do a couple seconds on camera, and then I'm out. But they have to understand that there's a community out there that looks up at them.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, they hold a lot of influence, and I just want them to use that influence in a way um, that can make all of us safer. And I think that it would be easy for them to do. It wouldn't be a lifetime commitment. But what they say periodically matters. And it can change, it can shift energy, it can shift people's thinking, and that's what we need. We need that kind of investment, because it benefits all of us when communities are safe, when we're not worried
That's
about
right.
violence, when we're not dealing with, gang violence and drugs and teenage pregnancy and all the things that are a result of violence in the home, because those things drive those kinds of other kinds of violence, as people fleeing home, to hit the streets to be safe, and then bad things happen. And so we have if we have a commitment to each other, then I think we all do better. And I think sports has a way to amplify our voices that we just can't get to any other way.
Well, we're not going to solve every problem on this one podcast show, but Rita, like, you're great. You're great.
Thank you.
Keep doing the tremendous work you're doing. I'm honored to, to be in the spaces with you. I always say, like, I don't even know how I got here, but
Yeah.
I'm just honored to know you and to be, under, your guidance and your influencer too. You're influencer too. Like, and it, they, now I understand when, how I feel when, I have younger women and men come up to me and call me Miss Kim.
Yeah.
I feel old, but I like feeling old. I love feeling old. So,
Yeah.
cause,
Well, it was
cause when I
hard work.
got
It was hard work to get where you are.
because with all that, at the end of the day, that means they're coming to you to ask your advice on something.
That's right.
And that's kind of an honor. Like, and that's the way I look at you, Rita. It's like, come to Miss Smith and ask her, about her work, about her achievements. That's fine. But more or less, just listen to her talk about learning lessons and how to navigate life and how you can impact someone else's life, in a way that they'll go forward and, reach back and touch another, bring another person along and another and another. And that's the way it should always circulate. Well,
Yeah.
Rita, I appreciate you being on our podcast today.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We just love Rita Smith, and of course, Rita, you and I will be in touch. We're joined at the hip now.
We still got plans, girl. We still got plans.
We got big plans. We
Yeah.
having big parties, I tell you. And we got the big season coming up. When does the season start this year?
Well, they start their what they call organized team activities, the OTAs, sometime in July, August. So those are the things they're required to do. And then training, training camp is like, everybody gets there and tries to survive the cuts. So when they get down to the 54, 52, whatever the number is, they have
Are
to get
some
to.
of the teams early this year? Because I saw something on the news the other day. The Washington Commanders started.
They do some that they're not required, but they do some stuff in the spring.
Okay.
They get together, and I don't think those activities are required. Some may be, but they do a little bit in the
But
spring,
it's
and then
recommended.
yeah.
It's recommended.
I think it's a good plan, for them
Well,
to
Rita,
assess your body so that they can tell whether or not you need physical training before you get back in the rut. So yeah.
well, there's nothing. Well, it'd be nice if they can connect that with the mind, body, and spirit, right? Do it all in one swoop,
Yep.
and maybe you might come out with a better production of a player at the beginning of the season.
It
Rita,
could be.
thank you for joining us here today,
I
and
appreciate it.
yeah, we gotta talk again soon.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
See you soon, Rita.
All
Take
right.
care,
Take
my
care.
dear.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.